They laughed when the lawyer slid the envelope across the table. My brothers toasted their millions, raising crystal glasses in my father's honor, while I sat there with nothing but a bent piece of paper carrying my name. That was my inheritance, mockery sealed in an envelope. And in that moment, I realized something I had tried to deny all my life, to them. I was never a son. I was the mistake they were proud to parade as a joke. My name is Brandon Scott, and what I found inside that envelope would rip apart every lie I had been forced to live with. The air inside the Scott estate felt colder than the October wind outside. I walked past portraits of stern men in tailored suits, each one staring down as if judging my right to even step through the door. The mahogany dining table stretched across the room like a barrier. James leaned back in his chair, silver cufflinks catching the light as he boasted to anyone who would listen. Richard sat opposite, eyes fixed on his phone, already scrolling through listings of luxury condos, thumbs moving with greedy precision. I slipped quietly into the far end of the table, my plain shirt almost invisible against their expensive suits. Attorney Finch adjusted his glasses and spread the thick folder before him. His steady voice filled the silence. The words were expected. James received the sprawling properties. Richard inherited the vintage cars and liquid accounts. Champagne corks popped before Finch even finished the sentence. Laughter echoing off the wood-paneled walls. I sat still, waiting, my pulse hammering, knowing my turn was last. Then Finch reached into his briefcase. Instead of another folder, he pulled out a bent envelope, its corners frayed, my name scrawled across it in a shaky hand. He set it down before me. James erupted first, chuckling so hard he nearly spilled his drink. "Maybe it's a gas coupon," he sneered. Richard smirked without looking up. "Or directions to the unemployment office." Their laughter filled the room as I slid the envelope into my jacket pocket, its weight almost nothing, yet crushing. I stood, leaving their celebration behind. The words Finch had read still echoed. Character determines worth. Sitting in my battered Honda, parked between their gleaming imports, I stared at the envelope in my hand, light as paper, heavy as everything I'd never been allowed to be. The road back to Denver blurred before my eyes as memories I had buried long ago clawed their way to the surface. The mansion I had grown up in had always felt more like a museum than a home, each marble corridor reminding me I didn't belong. My room wasn't a bedroom at all. It was marked Guest Room 3, its narrow window overlooking the trash bins behind the garage. Even as a boy, I understood what that label meant. At dinner, the distance was more than physical. My chair was pushed to the far end of the long oak table, while my father and brothers sat clustered together at the other. Their conversations flowed effortlessly about schools, business, and parties, while my words, if I ever dared to speak, dissolved into silence. Once, when I won a science fair in high school, I carried the medal home with trembling pride. My father barely glanced at it before turning to James with a smile, praising him for representing the family name at a charity gala. The medal never left my pocket again. But, in the haze of those cold years, one memory of warmth lingered. My mother's arms around me, her perfume faint but unforgettable. She whispered into my ear words I never understood until now. "If anything ever happens to me, you must find the truth." For years I dismissed it as the kind of reassurance mothers give frightened children. Yet, as I gripped the steering wheel that night, the memory seared with new meaning. Tears stung my eyes. My mother hadn't been preparing me for comfort. She had been leaving me a warning. The so-called accident that took her life might have been something far darker. Back in my cramped Denver apartment, I sat at the wobbling wooden table, the envelope heavy in my hands. My fingers trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a single folded slip of paper, a string of numbers, and beneath it, a sentence scrawled in my father's failing hand. "Your mother knew why." A chill ran down my spine. Numbers could mean anything, but these were precise, deliberate, an account number at a Swiss bank. I stared at the words again and again, torn between curiosity and anger, wondering what cruel joke this was meant to be. I turned to my laptop, logged into the California State Police Archives, and searched for the file I had never dared to touch. The report from the night my mother died. It took time, but eventually the digital record appeared, grainy scans from the 1990s. The official summary matched the story I had always been told. Brake failure, single vehicle crash. But the detailed investigation notes told another story. The brakes had been deliberately cut. Tool marks lined the severed line. The officer's recommendation was clear. Homicide investigation warranted. Then, at the bottom, stamped and scanned, was the authorization to close the case, signed by my father. I froze, staring at his signature, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. He hadn't just known. He had stopped the search for her killer. My mind spun as the realization crashed over me. Had he been protecting someone or covering for them? The envelope hadn't given me closure. It had shattered everything I thought I knew. The glow of my laptop was the only light in the apartment, casting long shadows across the walls as the same accident file blinked back at me. My mother's death had always been a closed door, but tonight I refused to stop knocking. Pain and rage twisted together, a current driving me deeper into records I had never dared to open. Each click brought up more fragments of sealed investigations. Scott Industries flagged by the FBI in the late 90s. Entire sections blurred out or stamped classified. The deeper I went, the more the picture warped. Then the phone rang, slicing through the silence like a blade. The screen showed an international number. I answered, pulse hammering. A deep, accented voice spoke my name slowly, almost ceremonially, then added words that froze my blood. Or should I call you the son of Agent Russo? My mother's name, her real name, echoed through the line, shattering the last illusion of normalcy. The caller introduced himself as a Heinrich Ducker, saying he had safeguarded a Swiss bank account in my name for 25 years. And then the blow I never saw coming. My mother had not been a secretary at all, but an undercover FBI agent embedded inside my father's empire. I lurched back in my chair, breath coming short. If she was an agent, I shouted into the phone. Why am I still alive? Why wasn't my father arrested? Ducker's reply was calm, almost gentle. Look at everything inside the account. Only then will you understand. I logged into the Zurich bank site with the numbers from the envelope, each keystroke echoing like a heartbeat. When the account opened, the balance on the screen made my vision blur, over $120 million, waiting under my name. I scrolled through the history, my hands trembling. Regular transfers from something called Project Prometheus stretched back to years before I was born. The last deposit matched exactly the day my mother died. Ducker's voice returned through the speakerphone, no longer mysterious but heavy with facts. My father had discovered who my mother really was. Instead of eliminating her, he had struck a covert deal with the Bureau, keep the company running, feed them information, and quietly build a clean account for me, far from the blood-stained fortune my brothers would inherit. The coldness that had defined my childhood wasn't hatred at all. It was a wall he built to keep me out of the fire. Memories collided, his stern gaze, the curt warnings never to get involved with family business. I had thought they were daggers. Now I saw they were shields. My chest burned with anger and grief. You could have told me, I shouted at the empty room. You didn't have to let me grow up thinking I was nothing. On the screen, a single message flickered beneath the account details, written in my father's hand. You'll understand when I'm gone. Night had swallowed Denver, but my apartment glowed with the pale light of my laptop. The Zurich account was no longer just a number. It had become a labyrinth of files, hundreds of them, waiting to be opened. I clicked through folders labeled with years I barely remembered. Photographs, FBI memos, scanned documents, all pieces of a puzzle my father had hidden from me. Then a sound file loaded, and for a heartbeat, I couldn't breathe. Two adolescent voices whispered on the recording, unmistakably James and Richard. If she finds out, we lose everything, James hissed. We have to handle it, Richard murmured back. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the mouse. I played it again, slower this time, hoping I'd misheard. But the words were clear, my brothers, still boys, plotting like men. I opened my father's handwritten notes linked to the file. The truth rose off the page like smoke from a long-dead fire. James and Richard had discovered my mother's true identity years before. They weren't victims of circumstance, they had orchestrated it. Twist after twist uncoiled until it struck me full force. They had hired someone to cut the brake lines. The accident that killed her was no accident at all. Bile rose in my throat. I stumbled to the sink, gripping the edge, nausea shaking me. The faces of my brothers flickered in my mind, laughing at family dinners, smirking at my failures. Now those same faces stared back as killers. My father's final note appeared at the bottom of the screen. I chose to hide this to keep you safe. One day, you must decide. Rage erupted, hot and uncontained. I slammed my fist against the table until the screen flickered. What justice is left for her? I shouted into the empty room. If I stay silent, I'm no better than them. For 3 nights I barely slept. The glow of the laptop, my only companion. The balance, $120 million, sat on the screen like a dare, while folders of evidence opened one after another, each darker than the last. Wealth enough to disappear forever stared at me beside proof of my brother's crimes. I drifted into brief, restless dreams where my mother appeared at the edge of a shadowed room. She never spoke. She just looked at me, her eyes filled with a plea I couldn't ignore. Each morning, I woke gasping, the choice still waiting. Digging deeper, I found fresh files my father had compiled in secret. Twist 6 unfolded before me. James and Richard had expanded far beyond fraud and laundering. There were wire transfers tied to smuggling routes, encrypted memos about human trafficking. The evidence was overwhelming. At the bottom of one file, my father had typed a single line. "Justice is already in your hands." Then the threat arrived. An anonymous email landed in my inbox. "Leave what isn't yours." No name, no signature, just a warning. Someone knew I had opened the account. Twist 7 became undeniable. This wasn't only an ethical dilemma anymore. My life was at risk. I stood at the window, looking out over Denver's glittering skyline. The city lights blurred into a haze of gold and red, but inside me was only darkness. My fingers curled around the glass as if it could steady me. "If I take the money, I betray her," I whispered. "If I tell the truth, I might lose everything. What am I supposed to do?" The apartment was quiet except for the soft whir of the laptop fan. The account number from that brittle slip sat open on my screen like a loaded gun. $120 million, decimals neat and unforgiving. Beside it, folders of scanned files, audio clips, and my father's handwriting. Everything he had packed away for me without a word. I felt both small and enormous at once, as if someone had handed me the fulcrum to tilt the world. I typed the transfer command, watched the cursor blink, and then deleted it. Again. My fingers hovered, then clicked. All funds, destination unknown. The cursor blinked, I backed out, breathing too fast. 3 times I tried to move everything away. 3 times I stopped. Each aborted transfer felt like a confession I wasn't ready to make. My mother's voice came to me, not in memory, but in obligation. "Find the truth, Brandon." That whisper had always been a puzzle. Now it was a mandate. The money wasn't a prize, it was leverage, evidence, temptation. If I walked away with it all, I could vanish into a different life. But what would that life cost? How many graves would I walk past knowing I'd kept my hands clean only by paying silence with someone else's blood? I found myself doing arithmetic with principles. 10 million would buy a future without strings, a modest endowment to start again, to help build something honest. The rest could be preserved as a weapon for justice. The decision crystallized with a ruthlessness I hadn't expected. Take enough to be free, and use the remainder to bury the empire that had buried my mother. I printed until my ink cartridge ran dry. Each page felt like pulling another brick from the foundation of a house built on lies. I organized the documents into 2 packages, methodical, almost clinical. The first was bound in a folder labeled for the Bureau, transaction records, memos, recordings, maps of shell companies. The second was smaller, addressed to the corporate headquarters, the same building where my brothers had toasted their fortunes, Time to arrive at exactly 2 in the afternoon, the same hour when they had treated my inheritance like a joke. I folded that second packet inward and slid in one sheet of paper with a single, unadorned sentence. No explanations, no speeches, only the weight of truth waiting to be opened. When the envelopes were sealed, I surprised myself by not feeling victorious. I felt nothing heroic, only an exhausted calm, the kind that comes after a long climb when your knees finally stop shaking. I sat back, hands still smelling faintly of printer ink, and whispered into the dark, "The game has turned. Now it's their turn to open a door they didn't expect." That afternoon, every channel lit up with breaking news. The words "federal raid" scrolled across the bottom of the screen as helicopters hovered above downtown Los Angeles. Cameras zoomed in on the gleaming glass tower of Scott Industries just as federal agents stormed through its doors. Sirens wailed, agents in dark jackets poured inside, and chaos spilled out onto the sidewalks where reporters shouted into microphones. The first image burned into me. James, my eldest brother, dragged out in handcuffs, his face blotched red with fury. He shouted over the crowd, spitting words at the reporters, insisting it was all a mistake. His arrogance had finally met the cold steel of justice. Moments later, footage cut to the underground garage where Richard made a desperate run toward his car. Agents tackled him hard against the concrete, pinning him to the floor as his shouts echoed like an animal caught in a trap. The unraveling spread fast. At LAX, cameras caught James's wife surrounded by marshals, clutching a designer suitcase stuffed with cash and jewelry. At the marina, Richard's wife tried to register the family yacht under her name, only to be surrounded before she could step aboard. The empire wasn't just collapsing, it was devouring everyone who thought they could outrun the truth. Then came the scene I had waited for. The envelope I had sent was opened in their boardroom. Inside, just a single page. Character determines worth. Enjoy what you deserve. Reporters described James slamming the table so hard his glass shattered, while Richard sat in silence, eyes hollow, as if the words had cut deeper than the handcuffs. Back in Denver, I sat on my worn couch, the glow of the television reflecting in the dark window. For the first time in years, my shoulders loosened, a laugh breaking free, not triumphant, but relieved. Justice had finally taken its place, and the laughter that once mocked me now belonged to them. Months had passed, yet the world I lived in now felt nothing like the one I'd left behind. I walked along a quiet street in Denver, the chill of early evening brushing against my face. No one glanced twice, no whispers followed me, no headlines carried my name. On a newsstand outside a corner store, a paper screamed across the front page, "Scott Empire collapses. Largest financial crime case in California in 30 years. I paused only for a heartbeat, then kept moving. That was no longer my story. My life had shifted into something simpler, though infinitely more meaningful. I had taken 10 million from that poisoned fortune and built a foundation with it, one dedicated to children who had lost their parents to violence. Each time I stepped into the modest building we rented, I saw young faces staring back at me, faces marked by the same loneliness that had haunted me for decades. And every time one of them smiled, it was like seeing my mother's eyes again, alive in a way I hadn't thought possible. The phone rang one evening, as it always did once a year. Heinrich Ducker's voice was steady, almost ritualistic. "Do you wish to claim the rest now, Brandon?" I answered as I always had, and always would. "No, I already have enough." In my desk drawer, I still kept the old envelope. Its edges were bent, the ink faded, but every time I held it, a strange peace filled me. What had once been a mark of humiliation had become a symbol of my freedom, a reminder that I had finally broken free from the weight of a name that was never meant to define me. That night, as the sun bled red across the horizon, I whispered into the quiet air, "The real inheritance isn't money. It's the right to choose who you become." And for the first time, I truly believed it.